Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the COVID-19 New Crisis, Same Story series. In episode 4, we heard from nonprofit leaders across the country focused on disrupting racial economic inequality by advocating for livable wages and income supports that allows people to save in order to accumulate assets and wealth. More of their voices and experiences are captured in our new report, COVID-19 New Crisis, Same Story, highlighting the innovations to racial economic inequality from leaders of color. In today's episode, we are focusing on the longstanding issue of housing insecurity. The 5th episode in the Racial Economic Equity series introduces community leaders in Chicago and New Orleans who are working to protect already cost-burdened families and communities that are facing a loss of housing as eviction and foreclosure moratoriums are set to expire. In today's episode, we will review how COVID-19 has worsened housing insecurity in communities of color. We'll then discuss the structural, systemic, and institutional factors that lend to disparities in housing cost burden. And lastly, we'll close by reviewing solutions in both policy and practice that will create proper supports for equitable recovery. Today, you will hear from Lillian Singh, who is the Vice President of Programs and Racial Equity at Prosperity Now. She will be moderating today's conversation with Joseph Lopez, who is the Executive Director of Spanish Coalition for Housing, and Nicole Barnes, who is the Executive Director, Jericho Road Episcopal Housing Initiative. And with that, I will turn it over to Lillian to get us started.
Thank you, Tupa, and thank you so much to Nicole and Joseph for agreeing to join us today. As Tupa mentioned, we're 9 days away from the CARES Act expiring, which was a helpful start in providing cash assistance to help households maintain their housing during this pandemic, and also allowing homeowners forbearances on mortgage payments. What we also know, however, is that organizations and people of color oftentimes face cash and liquidity challenges. So with this moratorium coming to an end in just a couple of days, we need to ready ourselves and our communities for what's going to happen in the housing space. So I'm so thankful to my partners who have agreed to just talk with us today about some of their innovative strategies, but also what they believe is still on the table to get done, to preserve, and to protect. So the first question that I have for Joseph and Nicole is, given COVID-19 pandemic, many organizations, including yourself, have shifted to a virtual environment. Can you all share with us about how this shift has taken place and how you continue to be able to provide assistance to families during this pandemic? Nicole, can you go first? I think you're on mute, Nicole. It's all good.
Sorry about that.
All good.
So a lot of Jericho Road's work is very direct services oriented to our clients. We conduct various in-person meetings, from our pre-purchase home buyer workshops, our individual financial coaching, our post-purchase workshops for our homeowners who have purchased homes to continue to support them as they acclimate to new home ownership. We host various community engagement meetings, including stakeholder meetings for various stakeholders in the communities that we work. We support neighborhood associations, you name it, we do it, and they're all in person. So we were very, very panicked, if you will, when the pandemic hit, to think about not being able to reach our clients, because we're very in your face, very touchy-feely. We are there with them, holding their hands. But what we found is that we pivoted to transition all of these services in an online format or a virtual format, some of it by phone, some of it through the computer. And it's been pretty seamless. I have to knock on wood here. And we've had an added bonus of seeing more participation than we did when we had the in-person workshops. So that has been a good thing. One of the things that we were concerned about was a lack of access to technology amongst our families. But we've been able to work with them through all of that and found that it has been increased participation and increased accessibility for them through these virtual formats. It was a pleasant surprise for us.
That sounds awesome. Thank you for that. Joseph, how are you pivoted in Chicago? What does it look like to, move virtual? You're also on mute. You get to go now.
I like to think, okay. Okay. I like to think of it as a forced experiment. For some time now, the organization has looked at how we can enhance our efforts to connect with our communities from an enhanced digital platform. When we were responding to the pandemic at the height of the pandemic about 8 weeks ago, we were forced to comply with the stay-at-home order implemented by our governor here in Illinois. In response to that, we had to take a real-time assessment of our technology capability to look at, one, equipping our staff with the necessary tools, the tech, the data plans to work virtually, to have a virtual format. So we started internally and then looked at external capabilities in terms of how our clients, the households that we service, would respond to this transition. For the past 45 years, our major way of implementing our programs has been direct service across our 3 office locations in Chicago. So this was a significant shift. It was a slow rollout, to be quite honest with you. But as we continued to proceed in the stay-at-home order in April and May, a lot of folks really re-engaged the organization and continue to access our services in a comprehensive housing platform. So we offer post-purchase, pre-purchase homebuyer education, rental assistance programs, foreclosure intervention, as well as reverse mortgage counseling, in addition to our financial coaching and our utility assistance programs. So all of these programs traditionally were in person. We pivoted virtually, and we also have an enhanced telephone counseling process as well that we've implemented over the years. So we just augmented that effort as well. So it's been well received across our communities, and we've actually seen an uptick in our participation both on our group education workshops for homebuyer education and as well as our in-person counseling sessions.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thank you for that. The next question is, we know that we are not through this challenge yet, right? Our communities have really yet to really see the impact of the pandemic in the housing space. So can you all, speak to, what are some of those challenges you're facing in your individual markets and cities as a result of this pandemic? So what does it really look like on the ground? Nicole?
Well, on both fronts, on the rental and the homeownership front, there have been some seismic shifts. New Orleans is a largely hospitality and tourism-driven economic market. The majority of our LMI families work in those industries. So we have seen a really vast increase in unemployment for folks who work in hotels, restaurants, all of our bars, all of our tourism-related industries. So on the rental side, we've seen just an incredible need for rental assistance. For example, our governor announced a rental assistance program on last Thursday. It was $24 million for the entire state. It started Thursday afternoon. The website went live. By Saturday night, they had received 40,000 applications, and they had to close down the website. When we did the math of 3 months of rental assistance at the minimum of a 1-bedroom apartment rent per month, which is about $800, we figured somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 people would be able to be helped from that $24 million. So the need is pervasive. And with the end of the CARES Act, as Lillian pointed out, next week, it's going to be particularly crucial for us to find resources to commit to rental assistance. On the homeownership side, what we've seen is those folks who have been consistently our buyers in a low to moderate income market for homeownership, those folks working in the tourism industry, they've not been able to buy. But the folks who work as essential workers in hospitals, grocery stores, and the like have seen an increase in their income. So they're more positioned to buy than they ever were before because they've had an increase in income, they can accumulate savings, and they're better positioned to buy. And particularly at this time when we have really low interest rates, this is an advantageous time for them to get into the market when prior to the pandemic, it would not have been. So conversely, the folks in the tourism industry aren't maybe able to buy now, but those folks who work in the ancillary industries that are now considered essential are better positioned to buy. So it's been a trade-off there.
Wow, thank you. That's an interesting nuance. Thank you for sharing that, Nicole. The need is great, obviously, in New Orleans, and I'm sure that that is true across all these communities. Joseph?
Yes, I think I may have lost your video. Can you see me? I'm sorry.
We got you.
Oh, do you? Okay.
I love this.
Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. I just got okay.
I love all of it. No, it's all good. We can still see you, Joseph. So the question is, what are the challenges you all are facing in the Chicago market as a result of this pandemic?
And the challenges have been extreme. On one end, with the sudden increase in unemployment in our communities, that has been significant across Chicago, whether it is the low to moderate income communities or just the higher end middle income communities of the city. I think as the city is really focused on a couple of different industries that reflect our clients. Much of it is in hospitality. It's very similar to New Orleans economy. We've seen a drastic increase in unemployment in that sector, as well as in manufacturing, light manufacturing, and transportation. So that has been significant. What that means for the households that we service is that there's significant hardship around the need for rental assistance and mortgage assistance, and the challenges to make those payments. We came out early on at the front end of the pandemic, leveraging our limited resources in response to that. So we had a small pool of funding at the front end to connect with rental and mortgage assistance. And that has been a program we've administered here in Chicago for a little over 10 years now. So obviously it wasn't built to respond to a COVID pandemic crisis, but we kind of laid the groundwork for that. So we have that extreme unemployment rates, the economic hardships with folks trying to make rent. One of the other key challenges we see in the city of Chicago is that much of our housing stock is 2 to 4 unit property. So much of it is mom and pop landlords who are owner occupants who rent to local individuals and families. And when those renters are struggling to make payments, it in turn impacts the landlord's ability to pay their mortgage. And so we've seen a drastic increase in those challenges. We do have a landlord association here in Chicago servicing a little over 500 landlords, which is only a drop in the bucket for the entire city. But with all those landlords that we currently connect with, we've received about 1,000 calls for assistance from landlords just to connect with any support services we may have. So in the city, on the one end of the housing spectrum, it's kind of triage crisis mode to respond to the economic hardship. On the other end, we also just recently came out with our homebuyer expo that we traditionally hold in June. It's a regional expo. We pivoted it virtually this year, and we were surprised to see that expo was attended virtually by a little over 350 prospective homebuyers. That in and of itself showed us some level of increase in interest in home ownership. We're seeing more listings happening here in Chicago for prospective properties, and continued interest and folks wanting to get on the path to home ownership. And I think a lot of that also is attributed to the stay-at-home order, where folks realized that they may need a larger living environment when they were cramped into smaller rental units. And over the past 12 to 16 weeks, those who maybe had been on the fence prior to the pandemic are now really looking at purchasing if they're in a economic situation to do so. So we're seeing a lot of interest in that as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Nicole, can you pick up right where Joseph left off around, some of those innovative practices that you all are seeing that the New Orleans market, for example, is pivoting in response to the pandemic to make housing stock, for example, more available?
So we have been looking at how the pandemic has not only impacted those folks who have a place to rent already and who have homes, but for the homeless as well. Realizing that you cannot get a handle on a pandemic as long as the people who are living on the street is at a high rate. And so part of what we needed to do was to look at how we give folks who are living on the street and who are considered homeless, who are previously living in shelters and who cannot be there now because of social distancing practices, how do we find a place for them to live? So we have, along with our partners at the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance and Housing NOLA, launched a pilot program to work with Airbnb operators who don't have any renters at this point or any customers at this point to house homeless families in their Airbnbs, provide the rental assistance to pay those Airbnb operators, and also supply wraparound services through social service agencies, our homeless agencies, to those families while they're sheltering in place. A big part of a stay-at-home mandate to shelter in place is having shelter. And for all of our homeless souls, that was impossible. So we need to figure out how we take care of them in this time so that we can get to the point that we have control of the pandemic and have reduced the spread of the coronavirus in our communities. So that is one way that we have worked to try to get resources that heretofore were not available for families. As Joseph said, a number of we still continue to push on our elected officials about capitalizing our housing trust fund. In times of emergency, you need a dedicated revenue source for your housing trust fund so that you can have money for emergency rental assistance. In Louisiana, we're a Gulf Coast state. We are subject to and vulnerable to emergencies every year with the possibility of hurricanes. Yet we still cannot convince our legislature that we need a dedicated revenue source that is regenerative for our housing trust fund so that when we have emergencies, we can move into a situation where we're not having 40,000 applications for slots that don't increase to more than 9,000. We need to be thinking about it proactively and not behind the 8 ball when we're in a crisis like the pandemic or like a hurricane, for example. So those are some of the ways that we're still pushing on our elected officials.
That's awesome. Joseph, you want to talk about, what's left on the table in the advocacy policy space in Chicago that we could be thinking about post the CARES Act's expiration date of next week?
Absolutely. So a couple things that we've been working on just to try to get in front of, the pending deadline and the limited resources that the federal government has provided is looking at additional ways where the state is investing in mortgage and rental relief. So in addition to what the state has received, as well as the city of Chicago has received from the CARES Act, they are also allocating several million to rental mortgage assistance and this triage moment as we work to help to stabilize households. So we've been able to leverage a little over 20 million from the state of Illinois across the state. We are one of a network of providers who will look to provide direct relief program support to renters as well as to homeowners. We've advocated for that direct funding to support up to $5,000 for rental payments or 6 months to households across Illinois, and up to $15,000 and mortgage relief payments to homeowners who all have been affected by the economic hardship of COVID-19. So that's been a significant advocacy approach that we've taken over the past 4 to 6 months in response to the looming deadline by the federal government as the unemployment insurance sunsets with that additional enhanced insurance benefits to households. We're also leveraging our existing partnerships, both with our foundation partners and local municipal government, to also increase the local investment in mortgage relief and rental relief. So that's an additional probably $5.3 million that the city is committing to households, particularly within the city of Chicago. So our service area includes Chicago, Cook County, and Collier counties, which is a little over a population of 5 million. Obviously, can't say that all 5 million folks are experiencing economic hardships, but we know that even a total of 30 million is still a drop in the bucket to the need. But we continue to advocate with our congressional delegation here in Illinois, our senators, our congressmen and women, as well as with our philanthropy and corporate partners to prepare for any additional mortgage relief programs. And the state of Illinois has had a history of successfully implementing mortgage relief programs. We, as an organization, have been kind of lead in that space. So we've been at the table helping to advise and to advocate for that as well.
That's awesome. So, this is off script, but, if there's one thing that you all think that we need to just, you can keep it to 30 seconds as we, continue to advocate at the national level. And you all are showing up on the front lines, at the state and city level. What, hope of inspiration do you all foresee as we, continue to go through this pandemic in these communities, communities of color who we know are going to be hardest hit by this crisis? We have already seen that in other areas, but certainly in the housing space. Any words of encouragement as we wrap up our session today?
I'll go next if we. I think we have to continue to put housing first, or start putting housing first. Whenever we're talking about a pandemic, anything that's happened, housing is always on the back burner, but we don't realize if you don't have a place to live, all the rest of the ills and the challenges that we face as a society can't be addressed until you solve the foundational problem of home, of a place to shelter. And it's never been more apparent than in this pandemic. If you go anywhere you go, you see all these signs, let's stay home, let's stay home. You have to ensure that people have a home and whether they're secure. Before the pandemic, 50% of all of our households in New Orleans were cost burdened. So imagine where we're going to go after the pandemic. Have we been paying attention to putting home first, putting in place policies and resources that help people to be at a manageable position, not be stretched to the max at 30%, 50% of their household incomes? Prior to this, you can absorb some of the challenges that come with an emergency or crisis. But if you're already starting at a cost burden point before the crisis hit, it just sends everyone into a tailspin. We have to recognize as a country that housing is a human right, and we have to put housing first.
Thank you.
It's never been more evident than it is now.
Joseph, 30 seconds. Nicole didn't stick 30 seconds, but that's
Yes, ma'am. So I would just reaffirm that. I mean, housing has been a cornerstone for both individual, family, and community health. And I think as our communities look to prosper, housing is paramount. Pre-COVID-19 and within the pandemic and through its recovery. I think that I do want to encourage folks to engage their legislators, their congressional legislators, consistently to underscore the importance of housing both to them, to their families, and to their communities. Because there are so many different proposals happening currently in Capitol Hill that I think with active involvement, and now is the time to get your voices heard and to really communicate with your legislators to articulate the importance of housing and opportunities for the government to support that.
Thank you. So despite our technical difficulties today, videos going out, we being on mute, I thank you for showing up, being your real self, being authentic. Thank you for being the true Avengers on the ground, on the front lines in Chicago and New Orleans. And we are so thankful and grateful for you to continue to advocate for organizations and people of color. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.